let one part of your mind engage introspection to check, am I starting to get sleepy, or am I very busy? And if the mind is very busy, try counting the breaths to keep you focused. And if the mind is very sleepy, try adjusting your posture more straight up and down. Just a gentle adjustment. Relax your attention.
I was never here. This never happened. Okay. Can you hear this? Are we getting sound from the mic? Turn it up a little bit. Okay. How about that? Okay.
Excellent. Okay. Okay, is that high enough for you guys in the back? Yeah, can you tell it's coming through? Yeah, ish, no? A bit more up. How's that? Is that better? Up higher? It like that. What do you think? Omani Peme Hum, Omani Peme Hum.
Can you say Craig at the back? Can you?
Yeah? Yeah? Yeah. Okay. Zarina, can you hear me? Yes. Excellent. Okay. So welcome again. And before we start, how did 15 minutes feel? Was it a useful 15 minutes, a disturbing 15 minutes? Both?
It felt long.
It felt long, yeah. Yeah, certainly. Which shows you how much you can get done in a short period of time, right? Even if you only did 5 minutes in the morning, or 5 minutes at night, 5 minutes in the middle of a busy day, just little short spurts of mindfulness actually does help you recalibrate. Because it does, time slows down when you only give yourself one job. Or speeds up, but in a sort of pleasurable way, like when you're having a great conversation with someone. So, whatever is the case doesn't really matter. The process itself is nourishing. So whether you had, quote, a good meditation or a bad meditation, how do you feel afterwards is a good question. Does anyone feel worse than when they started? No? Everyone feel a little bit better than when they started? So this is an interesting thing to investigate, right? Even if you had what you would call a bad meditation, however you define that, do you still feel better having given it a go? Ish?
It depends how you define good.
Good. Better than before? Like calmer or more agitated?
I'm more calmer, but more aware of some stuff.
Yeah, right. This is a very good point. You become calmer, and then all of your life details become clearer. Right? And you're like, oh my God, I forgot to feed the dog. Is the kettle on? My mother-in-law hates me. I have a deep-seated, unresolved depression. I need to look at that. Oh my God. All right, yeah. So yeah, when you're really busy in your mind, you might forget. Yeah. So it could be a troubling clarity, but useful. Yeah. Yeah, useful. Okay, so discovering Buddhism. The way I'm going to do tonight is kind of give you like a little taste of each of the topics. So some of the topics I'll just kind of give you the philosophy, and some of the topics we'll just do a meditation to play with it. And in this way, you can kind of ask yourself, is this a program I want to plug into sometimes? All the time? Because the flexibility of this curriculum is really interesting, because while each topic leads to the next and reinforces the next, they still all stand alone. So you could jump in at topic number 5 and not be totally lost. But you could also be going through it from the very beginning and notice that content is building. It's a really flexible curriculum. So there's a few ways to approach discovering Buddhism. One is like the total tourist, right? Sitting in the back, arms folded, totally chill, just curious. Yeah, kind of take it or leave it. Let's see what the Buddhists actually think, because this is one of the courses where you hear straight Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist terms explained, Buddhist worldview really fleshed out. It's not Buddhism light. Right? It's not mindfulness, pop mindfulness. It's not New Agey. This is straight Buddhism. So if you're just kind of curious, what do Buddhists actually believe, but you may or may not have any interest in being Buddhist, you could still come and just be like, so that's the deal with karma this whole time, right? And you could kind of, just kind of in a touristy way. That would be totally fine. Another way to use Discovering Buddhism would be to kind of go more deeply with each of these topics that you might have heard things about before. They might be all topics you've heard in different locations, but you're kind of starting to get the whole picture and where everything fits in terms of your personal practice. What does this actually look like in my daily life? What does this look like in my relationships? And also, how do I take this to my meditation cushion? So it can be a little bit more in-depth than just, years of public talks unrelated to one another. It can kind of give you a more cohesive picture of the whole. Another way to do it is to actually go what its design was for, which is like a university course. At the end, you get a certificate saying now you can teach in a sort of very general meditation facilitator kind of way. And that's one of the nice things about our organization, the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition, the FPMT, is that to teach you actually have to have studied and passed exams and been checked out. It's reassuring, right? Because there's a lot of kind of stuff out there and you're not sure, are they grabbing lots of bits from different places and then their own life experience and they're kind of interesting and just throwing it out there, or did they actually study a valid tradition and go through a process themselves? You know, there's pros and cons to both, but know that if you come to an FPMT center, the people teaching themselves have studied and practiced a long time and have been vetted and checked out. So if you're kind of interested in helping the center by being a meditation teacher, or yourself in your life just kind of want a little bit more skills, this is a really good curriculum to really deepen. So the way that would look is that there's like required readings, there's very gentle exams, but exams nonetheless, and there's practice requirements. Yeah, there's meditation practice requirements that you have to do in order to get certification, which means you've actually gone through an internal process that was not just intellectual. So even if you have no interest in teaching, it's a fun thing to do anyway. So there's these kind of layers, right? Totally touristy, somewhere in the middle, bit hardcore. And all of those people could be in the same class and make for a dynamic class. There could be someone of another religion in the same class, just curious about Buddhism, throwing out interesting arguments. There could be a total atheist philosopher coming to the class, throwing out interesting arguments, and that would all make it really kind of fun and dynamic. So everyone would be welcome to Discovering Buddhism, but there might be a lot of different reasons why you would come. So if you get the general idea that this is really Buddhist content, then you can decide whether or not you want to rock up and see bits of it. Does that make sense? So before I go into the topics, do you have any questions so far? Clear enough? Anyone want to leave? No. No, right.
How long would it be each of these modules that you're talking about?
Sorry?
How long?
How long do they take?
Yeah.
One topic takes around 8 to 12 sessions. So it could be a weekend intensive of the content and then a weekend intensive of the practices, and then you're done. Or it could be like a weekly class that, over, maybe 2 months you finish one topic. So however the center wants to pace it differs a little bit. But, it really, for those of you that aren't interested in being really hardcore about it, you could just decide to pop in at the topics that interest you, and that would be fine. But to do the whole thing, all 14 modules takes about 2 years. Some people really push it, some centers really push it and it's their main program and it only takes a year. But that's when it's like their main focus and they're not doing anything else. So, it's about the process, right? It's the journey, right? Who cares how long it takes? What are you going to do with your life, right? We're trying to find meaning and purpose, right? And a lot of people do the whole thing, say, that was great, and then just do it again, right? Because the point isn't to sort of like finish and get a certificate for its own sake. The point is your inner development, isn't it? Yeah. And so the certification is just so we know you understand things well enough that if we put you in front of other people, you're not going to tell them weird nonsense. Or at least it'll be our weird nonsense, not your weird nonsense, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, theoretically 2 years to do the whole thing. This last one, the special integration practices, these people can be working on throughout the whole thing or do it as a one-off. And these are like the big retreats. So the big retreat of the 2-week Lam Rim retreat, this is the sort of thing that in theory you could do all by yourself if you were a really good student and had really organized kind of life where you could take 2 weeks out of your life and walk yourself through all of the Lam Rim meditations by yourself. But it's probably better if you do it at a center for moral support and so you don't make mistakes. That's true of all of these. You could do them by yourself at your home or by yourself going away to a spa or a retreat center, but probably it's best if you do it within a center. It doesn't have to be this center. There's lots of centers who host these big retreats. The Lamrim retreat basically is the whole stages of the path. Here to enlightenment in gradual steps. So you're doing all of the meditations on the stages to enlightenment within 2 weeks, and it's really intense. But it's also really interesting because these things that you've understood intellectually, now you're challenging and integrating and seeing where they land and what changes in you because of them. So a 2-week Lamrim retreat is nothing to sniff at. It's actually a really hardcore process of analytical meditation. The 3 Nungnes are a totally different style of retreat. They're a Tantra retreat. So Nungnes, theoretically, you could do them not as a Tantric practitioner, but properly speaking, you're doing introductory Tantric practice, which means visualization and mantra. So if you hear Tantra and you're hoping for an orgy, you will be disappointed. Okay? What does Tantric meditation look like? This. That's what it looks like. Okay, so if you have some ideas about that word, put those to one side. That's not us. But, good luck to them, right? Good luck to them. But this Tantric retreat is really focusing on compassion specifically. So the Nungne retreat, the Nungne retreat involves fasting, and it involves prostrations, and it involves quite intensive visualizing and confronting your own obstacles to compassion, and it's an incredibly beautiful practice. And a lot of centers do them annually as just kind of a nice power cleanse. And so a Nungne retreat is something really interesting to do. Then the other 2 practices that you could be working on just kind of as your daily practice, or do them all intensively in a chunk, are the Vajrasattva practice and the prostrations to the 35 Buddhas. And those are purification practices. Does anyone know what purification is in the Buddhist context? Ish? Yeah? Throw it out there. What do you reckon? Purification?
Purification of karma.
Of karma, yeah. Yep. For what purpose?
To reach enlightenment.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Reduce your mental obscurations, absolutely. Yet, what else does purification do? Those of you that have studied, or just your best guess, given the word?
Would it clear like karmic deed?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
To let go of the ego a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely, to let go of the ego. Yep, absolutely. Purification basically is rendering karmic seeds unable to bear the fruit of suffering. So it's like burning them. Yeah? So if you have a seed, an apple seed, and you burn it, it can't make an apple tree. So it's not like it's no longer there. You still have imprints left, but you can't have suffering because of it. So the Vajrasattva purification retreat is really an interesting life reflection kind of a retreat, because it's long. It's 3 months. If you do it as your daily practice, that's okay too. You could just do a little bit every day for quite a while and get the same job done. But a lot of us do it as a 3-month retreat, and they have them at Kopan Monastery in India or in Nepal, and then at Shida, and they have them also, there'll be one in New Zealand next year at Mahamudra Center. So they're around, and if there's enough of you interested, you could make it happen here. But it is a fascinating way to look back over your life and the patterns that keep reappearing, the ways you hurt yourself, the ways you hurt others habitually, because you have the time and space to really dig into that. So it's not like a guilt and shame flood. It's actually really liberating, because you're like, oh, I have been doing that for years, and I'm just now catching it. Well, now that I've caught it, I can stop it, or at least work on it. And you might talk to your friends afterwards and say, I've just realized I do this. And they're like, we know, right? So it's kind of, it's a self-awareness retreat is what it really is. You're really expanding self-knowledge. So that's kind of the end of the whole sequence, but it also can be woven in throughout and started even right now, these integration practices. So these are kind of hardcore retreats. And again, they're totally optional for those of you that aren't into the practice side, are just interested in the philosophy side. You don't need to do that. It could be like, wow, okay, yikes. That's going on my no list, right? Or your someday list, totally fine, right? They're hardcore, but they're really interesting. So starting at the beginning, why do you think we would start with mind and its potential and not how to meditate? You would think you would start with how to meditate. But why do you think we would start with, let's look at the mind and what the mind is about? What's the benefit in doing that first before you even touch meditation?
Maybe it's answering the question, why meditate?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Why meditate? You realize your mind is up to all sorts of nonsense, right? That perhaps the source of our suffering is not the external world, it's the internal world. What is that internal world? How do you take control of it? Is it controllable? All of these questions make it a much more vital thing to learn how to meditate. Yeah, you actually have some hunger to meditate. A lot of us come to meditation just wanting some stress relief, right? Which is fine, right? We all need stress relief. Or we come to meditation out of curiosity, which is fine. But we'll find that we lose momentum if that's the only thing it's for. Because sometimes meditation is stressful. Sometimes meditation brings up demons. And that is interesting within the larger framework of a spiritual path. Right? If you have a spiritual path, stuff coming up is interesting, can be fuel for transformation. But if you're just wanting to relax, you're like, well, I didn't sign up for this. What is this? All of this stuff coming up, right? It'd be better to just go have a holiday, right? So to really have the energy to meditate in a transformative way, not just a tourist way, you want to investigate how the mind works. Yeah, so have some of you done Mind and Its Potential before or other teachings on the mind? Some of you know this topic a little bit? Ish? Yeah, one or two of you? Yeah, what? Kaisa has taught mind. Oh, what has she taught you? Now is the pop quiz. What are the important things?
Very serious now.
She's like, don't embarrass me. Right? What are some things you know about the mind? What is it?
Knowing?
Yep, it's knowing. That is one. What is the other word that goes with it?
Clear?
Clear. Perfect. Ah, well done. You're teaching them well. Clear and knowing. Yes. And that is good news, right? That the mind is naturally clear and knowing is good news. Are the negative habits permanent? Are they something that stains your consciousness forever? No. Let's say it together. No! Right? No. They're not. Are good qualities things that you can develop so much that they never leave? No. Yes. Intriguing, right? Intriguing. You could develop a positive state of mind so strongly that it imbues your consciousness and doesn't leave. Perhaps we have not done that yet, right? But actually it's interesting to look at positive states of mind are accurate. They're in accord with reality. And so when we reinforce them and develop them, there comes a point where you can't unlearn them. Yeah? There comes a point where the repetition and the familiarity makes them one with your mind. Whereas negative states of mind, no matter how habituated you become to them, are always removable because they're inaccurate. They're not in alignment with reality. So this is interesting, right? This is really intriguing. And you might think of really dodgy people in your life who seem to be just wired evil or wired bad. We would say, no, they just have an incredibly strong habit. A very strong habit of anger, a very strong habit of harm, but it actually has not fundamentally taken over their mind such that it can never be removed. It's just going to take a while. Yeah, maybe many lifetimes. Maybe some people won't get any better in this life. That's absolutely possible, but it's not a forever thing. But the good news for us is that we already have some positive states of mind that come and go, like sometimes we are loving, sometimes we're compassionate, sometimes we're patient. Already, right? Without any particular spiritual path, we already had some of these good qualities. We don't have to call them religious qualities, they're just good qualities. Patience serves us well in all sorts of areas. Compassion serves us well in all sorts of areas. And these can be actually seen more as tools and skills rather than things that have to be naturally present. Yeah? And this is really empowering for us, because if you're a very impatient person, you kind of say to yourself, well, this is just who I am. I'm just really impatient, as if you have no choice in the matter. And that people who are really patient, they're just naturally patient, naturally nice people. They're just like that. They've always been like that. And we can kind of categorize people into they're just that way, rather than looking at they're habituated that way. So if there are ways I am, like impatient, that are not working well for me in my life, it's not fate and it's not forever. I can train myself out of the habit of impatience. I can train myself into the habit of patience. And there are ways and techniques to do that. I don't have to just guess. I don't have to just hope. I'm not going to pray it to happen. There's techniques. And so that is the very cool thing about Buddhism. It doesn't say live in the image of our founder. Just live like the Buddha and you'll be a Buddha. Just follow his example. It's not so vague as that. It's a very specific spiritual path. It says, okay, you want patience? Here are the steps to patience. Yeah? And when you don't have patience, here are the antidotes. And it's very clear, very specific. It's tangible. It's put into words. And then you don't feel like these amazing people that we look up to are somehow fundamentally different than us. We realize what's different about them is they have trained their minds and we haven't. And we can become like them if we train our minds. Does it make sense? So this topic, mind and its potential, is very intriguing because you start to feel like this mind that you've had this whole time is actually something that you've got a lot more flexibility with than you realized. There's a lot more to play with there than we once thought. And there's also a lot more going on than we had first realized, which means that you can start to pick out different aspects of consciousness and train them up. Okay? So what we're going to do now is just a 5-minute meditation trying to look at all of the different things, not all of them, some of the different things happening in the mind that happen simultaneously. We call, this is what's happening, this is my experience, as if it's one thing, when in fact many things are happening with us every second, simultaneously. And so then we can start to pick, what are the parts of my mind that I can work with, and what are the parts of mine I'm going to have to wait to work with, because they're just habituated in this certain way really strongly right now. Where is the point of learning? Okay, so before we do this meditation, the first thing to know about mind and its potential, the first topic to understand is what's called the difference between main minds and mental factors. Okay, so think of like consciousness as a big umbrella, right? There's a big category which is consciousness. But then we can sort of look at different aspects of consciousness, one being that which sees the generality and that which sees specifics. That which just kind of has bare awareness, and then the opinionated part. You know, when you're very relaxed looking at stuff, sometimes you don't have clear word opinions. You know, you're just looking around, right? Whereas there's different times when you're very chatty in there, and you're like, I like that plant, I hate that chair, that floor is cool, what's happening there? You know, there's a lot going on. And this isn't a perfect analogy, but it's one way to kind of understand the different things happening in your mind. There's a part that's just aware, and then there's the part that's describing and choosing and has all sorts of things to say. Okay? And, you know, when you hear the analogy of the mind is like the sky and the clouds, right? The main mind is like the clear, broad sky. The mental factors are like the clouds moving and changing all the time. Does that make sense? So the main mind is usually not causing much trouble. It's the mental factors influencing it that are causing trouble. But they also are the source of realizations. They're the trigger for transformation. So those moving parts within the mind have all sorts of crazy habits of want and need and fear and anxiety. But once we get to know them, we can start to train them up. Okay, so the three that we're going to look at in this meditation are feeling, discrimination, and intention. All right, so we always, every moment of mind, have these three. We have many more as well, but that's a whole subject, right? So we always have feeling present. It could be pleasant, it could be unpleasant, or it could be neutral. But we always have feeling present, physically and mentally. There's always sensation, even if it's neutral sensation. We always have discrimination, which is a strange word that normally we connote with prejudice, but in this context is talking about like recognition or the ability to discern between things. It's the labeler. It's the part of the mind that says, this is a table, that is the floor. It's also the part of the mind that says, I like this table, I like this floor. My table, my floor, right? So discrimination or recognition, this mental factor, is what we train through analytical meditation. This is the place of real potential. And then we also have intention, which is the part of the mind that moves and chooses. So that's always happening simultaneously. And we're not even aware of it until we tease them out. So let's tease them out. Okay, so we're just going to do a short little experiment and see if you can capture some of those suckers. Okay, so again, just come back to the breath for a minute. Just letting surface distractions settle. And now let go of your awareness of the breath and just check, what is my body feeling and what is my mind feeling? Is my physical experience pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? And is my mental experience pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? It doesn't matter which it is, just try and figure out what's going on with you in terms of your feeling. Are the body and the mind having an identical feeling experience? Or is there some difference between the two? Maybe the body is a little bit too warm and it's a little unpleasant, but the mind is generally content or neutral. Doesn't matter, just be curious. Body and mind, is there a difference in feeling? And so there is experience or sensation. Is there also a part of the mind with opinions and labels and an ability to discern between things? What is the labeler in your mind doing right now? Is it thinking in words or pictures? Just try and figure out what's going on with discernment. Noticing the way it's separate from feeling, or a little bit different than feeling, although obviously related in ways. Maybe discrimination is describing to yourself what's happening. Maybe it's got all sorts of words about what you should or shouldn't be doing, boredom or interest. Maybe it's quiet. But then just shift to check, is there something also happening that is a little bit different to the labeler? Is there also a chooser? Look for mental intention. That part of the mind that moves towards or away from different thoughts and ideas. That one that decides what to do. What is intention doing? Intention might be deciding to look at intention, or it might be looking for other things to entertain it. Okay, go ahead and relax your attention. So the question here is there only one thing happening with your consciousness, or are there several things happening simultaneously that you could sort of put your attention to? Could you feel like there was a few different things happening at once, or did it just feel like one glob? Some difference? Yeah. And of course, all of the mental factors are interacting with one another, are influencing one another, but they are separate components, kind of conceptually. And so what's interesting is that life happens so quickly because we're not aware of how our mind works. And so you have a feeling, say a pleasant feeling, because you know, many reasons, karma ripening, for example. You have a pleasant feeling, and then you have an intention to continue that pleasant feeling, and so your discrimination is labeling what it is you think happened to make this pleasant feeling, and it all happens at once, and there you're eating cake. Yeah? And the thing is that if you are training discrimination, then you know, okay, this feeling is actually not related to this moment's activity. It's related to what has happened before, it's related to my karma, it's related to many things. So actually, let me make a different intention based on that awareness. It's interesting. So mind in its potential is really looking at the components of the mind and how they interact with each other to see where is it possible to have control and change certain habits of mind and expand different abilities of the mind. Because that's quite intriguing, isn't it? How can we expand our ability to be aware of more things? How can we expand our ability to have greater focus? How can we expand our compassion? These are intriguing concepts. So in studying the mind, you're really studying the self, even though the self is not the mind exactly. But it is this real process of peeling back, how does experience happen to begin with? And have I any control over that or not? And then maybe you want to meditate. Yeah? So then the second topic comes. Do you have any questions about that one before we stop and have a little break? Not? You're like, all right, okay. Mind in its potential. Oh, yeah, who knew? Right.
Why are we quiet?
Yeah. Why are you quiet? It's interesting. It's interesting. And it is the first topic that they start out with in the monasteries. The little tiny baby monks start out with learning about the mind, and it really works out well. And then they do a more advanced version of it when they're older. And they also learn how to debate right off the bat. And they debate easy things like color and shape, things that aren't particularly emotionally loaded, so that they can learn how to train the mind in logic. So now that we're adults, we have some funny habits. Some of them are useful, some of them aren't. But we can start kind of learning from this approach. And then when you get into how to meditate, you can really choose what are the things that I want to work on at the ability I'm at right now. And you don't, kind of like jump to more advanced meditations than you're ready for just because intellectually you understand them, right? And you also understand what are the foundations you need in order to progress in a really lovely way without different obstacles. And you can start really building a daily practice that is enriching and intriguing for you, as well as benefiting those around you. So how to meditate is basically looking at the different styles of meditation, analytical meditation, single-pointed meditation, visualizing, stuff like that. So you're just unpacking the different types and trialing different ones once you get to that topic. Yeah?
I maybe have a question.
Sure.
But it is about this labeling one. Or or I had the experience I was quite excited about being here and oh, this is so great. And then I was feeling my feeling and I was a bit sick, and then I felt it was nice to really see the dance. It was the feeling and the everything started to really I could in this short time it was really cool to see that I could almost tip over in my pity.
Yeah.
And how but this was both, I was both really excited and happy and really
yeah, exactly.
Everything sucks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. You're like, oh, my knee hurts. I love that green wall. Oh, my knee hurts. That green wall is awesome. Right? But yeah, more like that.
But there is something with meditation and this labeling thing when you kind of, that I feel similar, other meditation, maybe, I don't know, when you kind of quiet the labeler, then
yeah.
to judge what is it without concepts, all the sensation and stuff.
And this is more single-pointed meditation. Yeah, and so they both work together really well. It's helpful to develop single-pointed meditation and analytical meditation as separate skills before you try to put them together. There are some meditations that use aspects of both right away, but for us, especially as beginners, and even though I've been a Buddhist for 25 years, I'm still a beginner, it's useful to develop them as separate skills, and then when you're bringing them together, you're less likely to get tangled and agitated. So both are good, and in a practice you might do 5-10 minutes of one, 5-10 minutes of other. But if you know, analytical meditation is really giving emphasis to the mental factor of discrimination and re-educating it is what it's doing. Re-educating it with logic and reasoning. Combined with your life experience and combined with your own logic. So it's not like brainwashing, right? It's a collaboration with your own life wisdom and common sense together with Buddhist logic and ideas to sort of see how you can change the labeler to something more effective so that you can have a feeling that's uncomfortable but then not be angry because of it. And we already do that sometimes, right? If you love what you're doing, but you have the flu, you will still be happy and just look after yourself the best you can, but keep going with it. When you're really happy and loving what you're doing, but you just happen to be sick that day, you have suffering. You have an unpleasant feeling in the body, but a pleasant feeling in the mind. And it's because how you've labeled your experience, you're able to have two things simultaneously. But if you're not loving your life or what you're doing, you could have the flu and decide that's the reason that you're sad. Yeah, you could think, oh, I feel terrible, I feel so morose and depressed. It's this flu, I tell you, it's this flu. Yeah? Right? If you don't sort of take control of the situation, and then it quite becomes true, doesn't it? And very much we can become dictated by our physical experience. And these meditations aren't to ignore our physical experience, it's just to notice that there are separate things happening, and what we choose to give emphasis to doesn't mean it's the most significant thing. There are so many things happening in the mind, and we think the most vivid one is the most important. It doesn't have to be. We can kind of make vividness on a different part of the mind that's more a productive place without negating the fact that the other pieces are existing too. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, so it's a really intriguing topic, and it really helps you understand how to meditate and be a lot more patient with yourself when you do meditate, because you realize all the different things going on. Yeah, it's really interesting. So we'll stop, have a cup of tea for half an hour, and just chat amongst yourselves, bond, right? Think about questions, and then I'll just kind of gently go through the other topics. And you can ask questions, please, at any time.
Okay, thank you, Venerable. Please stand up.
If you want. Okay, the mic is working okay? Yes, okay, I think. Okay, so first of all, we discussed before this special integration practices at the end, and then mind and its potential and how to meditate. And so then I erased the top two because you understand that they exist. And I put on the website here, which is basically if you're forgetting any of the bits we're talking about tonight, it's got like a 2-sentence summary of each of the topics. So you can just look online and see again which was that one, which was which one. Also on YouTube, there are a series of 20-minute shorts, which are like a summary of the topic. So they'll have someone like Richard Gere or Keanu Reeves explaining the first bit, you know, just to hook you with a movie star, but then it goes into other Buddhist teachers and skills, right? And so then it'll talk about a summary of each of the topics. So those are all on YouTube, the 20-minute shorts. And it'll give you just kind of a taste of the topic. And then a lot of the full course, like all 9 or 10 or 11 sessions of the module, can be found at some of the other FPMT Center's websites. Each teacher goes by the same curriculum, but of course they're going to bring their own particular training and education to it, so the nuance will be a little bit different. But if you're curious, but you're not able to make a session, you can check online. So there's a lot of resources out there for those of you that can't get to a center, but really there's no substitute for being able to be with other people, chat in the breaks, to kind of be in the group energy to help keep you focused. Sometimes if you're watching stuff at home, you know, you're making a cup of tea, you're petting the cat, your partner comes home from work, it's a bit more distracting, and so you don't have that same kind of integrated experience of transformation unfolding, or if you do, it takes a lot more organization to make it happen. Also, if you're only by yourself doing it, you can't ask questions. So this whole process is very much a collaborative process of the students asking the teacher, arguing with the teacher, arguing with themselves, really playing together with ideas so that these things sink in. And for those of you that are total introverts and hate to talk, you don't have to. Okay. So, but it is interesting the difference between being in the group energy or not. But if you can't come to class all the time, there's plenty of resources online. Okay, so are there any questions before I keep going? Nah. All right, off we go. So getting the general idea of the mind and how to meditate, then we do presenting the path, which is the overview of the whole thing. Yeah, it's the overview of the whole path to enlightenment. And this is a really unique feature of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, is that some of you know that the Buddha taught for about 40 years, from his enlightenment until his death. He taught for 40 years, but he didn't teach like the beginning for the first 3 years, the middle for the next 3 years, right? He taught to whatever the audience in front of him needed. So some teachings were advanced right off the bat, and some of them were introductory. So we have this huge mass of teachings, and you know, it's a lot. But what happened in the 14th century, and prior to that also, but most famously with Lama Tsong Khapa in the 14th century, is he took all of the teachings of the Buddha and he figured out the order based on what the Buddha said, and he put them all in a beautiful sequence and summarized it into 3 volumes rather than 108. So the path to enlightenment then is a lot more tangible, because you're like, all right, what's step 1? How about I just start at the beginning of the book? It's really straightforward. It's a beautiful presentation. So the whole path to enlightenment, like overview, just kind of like a flyover, and then the rest of the teachings are drilling down into each one. But this is a really good one for kind of understanding the Buddhist worldview in a nutshell. So the main things it talks about are what's called renunciation, or the determination to be free. Bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, and the correct view of emptiness. So have some of you had teachings on those topics? Yep. What would you say, generally speaking, is renunciation, or the determination to be free? What is that? Just in everyday language, how would you describe it? Yeah, go.
To turn to what you think is like what, not you think, but to turn to what is important or what is like, yeah, maybe benefiting others, and like turn away from like habitual patterns and like confusion.
Yeah.
So it's like a double mode.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, it's a shift of priorities.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, how else would you describe, that's beautiful. How else would you describe renunciation or the determination to be free? Be free from what?
Is it attachment?
Sure, definitely attachment is one piece. Yeah, what else? More suffering, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. So if we were to take attachment and suffering, what is that? What's that a good way to describe something else? A bigger category. What do suffering and attachment fall under? The big category of samsara. Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's the determination to be free from samsara, or cyclic existence, or uncontrolled rebirth. Right? Buddhists don't want to reincarnate, right? That is not our goal. We believe in reincarnation, but it's not like our mission. We want to stop it, right? We want to nip it in the bud. It's not doing us any good. And from a Buddhist perspective, reincarnation isn't like a nice linear evolution that's all beautiful and tidy, and after this life we'll be in a beautiful realm, and then that life will be in a beautiful realm, and eventually come to our awakening. No, we could be a cockroach next time. Easy. Right? If we're lucky, a cockroach, right? Who knows what on earth we've habituated ourselves to in there. So it's an uncontrolled rebirth. And, if you think, no, I chose to come to this life. I chose to come to these parents. Maybe. Probably not. Probably not. Did you choose all of the things that have happened in your life so far? Some of them. Was it purely independent choice, unrelated to other influences? Probably not, right? How much control do we have in a daily life? It's interesting to investigate. And so the determination to be free is the determination to be in control. Rather than being controlled by karma and disturbing emotions, we want to take control and be motivated by compassion and loving kindness and wisdom. So renunciation is really giving up the causes of suffering. Does it make sense? And so how do you do that? What does that look like? That's kind of one of the big topics, because it's a foundation for all other Buddhist practices, is to have this real wish to get out of these patterns that hurt ourselves and others. Yeah? And then not only do we want to do that for ourselves, we realize everyone else is in the same boat. Everyone else is controlled by their negative states of mind, like anger and attachment and confusion. We're not alone in this. And they also are dictated by their karma and all sorts of other factors. We don't want to just free ourselves from suffering. We want to free all living beings from suffering, right? We don't want to leave people behind. Right? So bodhicitta is this mind of enlightenment which seeks enlightenment in order to be of greatest benefit to all sentient beings. So it's not for yourself alone. It's not mere nirvana. It's nirvana plus. Okay? So Buddhahood enlightenment is not the same thing as nirvana. Nirvana is the state without sorrow, a mental state without suffering. And we do want that, but we don't want to leave it at that. We really don't want to leave anyone behind. So bodhicitta rests on renunciation, because when you see how uncontrolled your experience is and you have this real hunger to get out of this mess, hopefully it occurs to you other people are struggling. Hopefully you have enough of an expanded view to realize I could be of some use in this world. Yeah, and maybe I can't pluck anyone out of suffering and plunk them into happiness. Because if that was possible, the Buddhas would have done that for us already. They would have been like, oh, you poor bugger, let me take you out of there, shake it off, plunk you there, right? If they could, they would have, right? But the thing is that we're prevented from accessing the benefits of the awakened mind and all of the sort of help that's being flooded into us because of our own obscurations, our own mental blocks. So what can we do for others is kind of help them help themselves. Help them help themselves. We can't fix anyone, but we can offer them tools to fix themselves. And if we were to do that right now, it might not work, right? If we were to offer people tools to fix themselves, they might have no interest. It might annoy them. It might alienate the relationship, right? You'd be like, here's how you could lead a better life. They'd be like, I have some things to say to you about that, right? So if we were awakened, if we were enlightened, we would have perfect timing. We would have perfect timing. Right now, our timing's a bit hit and miss. Yeah, when we're actually able to be of benefit. Sometimes we are of benefit, and sometimes with the best of intentions, we're not. This is why we need to become a Buddha, so that we have perfect timing. We know exactly what to say, when to say it, and when to shut up. We know what are the conditions that will help someone else develop their potential, because we've done that for ourselves already. So bodhicitta is a beautiful state of mind that we want to cultivate, and this particular topic is going to introduce that, and then it gets fleshed out in number 10. So you get kind of a taste of it in presenting the path, and then it gets fleshed out in number 10, and then even more reinforced in number 11. So bodhicitta is really the goal of Mahayana Buddhism. Bodhicitta, this intention to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, this starts to become our motivation for everything. And, so it's a really important topic. And then the last one is this very intriguing idea that is not necessarily religious at all, which is the correct view of emptiness. And to say emptiness isn't to say nothingness, it's to say the emptiness of inherent existence. So the fact that everything is empty of inherent existence is not something that we have to just force ourselves to believe or as a religious concept. This is something that, like, quantum physicists are coming to understand more and more themselves through science. It's not just a Buddhist view, it's very scientific. And basically underpinning it, the way we access it, is to understand dependent arising. So the way we come to understand that everything is empty of inherent existence is to look at the way that nothing comes about by itself. There's nothing that comes about by itself. There's nothing that stands alone or exists from its own side in and of itself. Okay? And the problem is that our innate ignorance believes the opposite. To us, things appear truly existent when they are empty of inherent existence. Like, I look at this plate, and it looks like obviously a plate from its own side, as if the plate was telling me that it was a plate. That's the way it feels before we examine it. Of course it's a plate, it's obvious. Forgetting that when we were a child, we were introduced to the concept of a plate. Before we were introduced to the concept of a plate, it could just as easily be a hat, right? It could just as easily be a toy. It was not a plate from its own side. Until when we were introduced to it, we're like, oh, a plate, okay, you put stuff on it. And then it was reinforced and reinforced and reinforced, and as we got older, now it becomes obvious. The problem is that it seems obvious. That doesn't make any difference with plates. We don't have plate drama, usually, right? We're not having fights with our plates, but we do have fights with people, because we view them exactly the same way. Yeah? We think they exist just as they seem. Yeah, from their own side, they are a bad person. From their own side, they're a good person. If they are a bad person, they must get away from me. If they are a good person, they must come close to me. And anyone I haven't really labeled much, I don't care about. I'm indifferent to. Yeah? And hence the world not doing so well. So this innate ignorance doesn't understand reality. And if we were to understand reality clearly, we would cut the root of samsara, or cyclic existence, and no longer be without control. Does it sort of make sense? Some of you have had this teaching before. It's an intriguing concept, right? So if you know, okay, things are empty of inherent existence, that's a little bit abstract, but that the other side, the relative truth of things, is a little bit more tangible, that things only exist because of what? Causes and conditions, parts, a mind labeling it. That's how things exist. But it seems the other way around. Yeah? Do you remember the first time you saw the letter A? Did you know it was the letter A before someone told you? You saw lines there. Yeah? And then you learned about A so many times that now when you see it, it pops off the page as if it's telling you it's the letter A. Yeah? When you were a very little kid, you might not have had huge opinions about what are good people and what are bad people. Who are the people to discriminate against and who are the people that are your people. You might have been a lot more fluid when you were a kid, depending on the conditioning you came in with. But then as we got older, we had interactions, and the mind wants to create patterns, doesn't it? It wants to kind of become efficient and cut to the chase and make assumptions, you know, because it makes life easier and because we're a little bit lazy, right? So if you have a bad interaction with someone, you immediately start to latch on to the obvious traits and details of that person. And then anytime you see someone that reminds you of them, you have an assumption this is someone to be aware of. And that's not all bad from a survival perspective. The problem is we don't have any space to check, right? And this is how all prejudice reinforces itself, doesn't it? Yeah? You have an assumption based on one set of circumstances, and then you universalize it without checking, because the problem is each time is a little bit different. Each person is a little bit different. So making these immediate assumptions seems like it's saving time, seems like it's making you safe, but what it really does is reinforce the illusion of separateness. Do you understand? So presenting the path is mainly going to be talking about the determination to be free, the mind of enlightenment, and the correct view. These are the main pieces in Buddhism to understand and practice, but it'll also give an overview of the whole path. So it's an interesting one to touch base with. Now, once you kind of get the overview, you might be motivated to do something. Once you really get the sense of the mind, how to meditate, the overview of Buddhism, you might think, this is for me, right? And then you need a teacher. Yeah? Now, it might be that you think you can do it all by yourself. Maybe you can, but you know, if you take a really worldly example, like if you're going to a country you've never been before, is it easier to go with a friend who's been there before or to do it completely by yourself? Right? It's much easier if you have a guide. You're not going to make as many mistakes. You're going to get to where you want to go more quickly. It might actually be fun in the process. You could go to a new place without anybody there to guide you and it work out okay, but it also could go really badly. So the spiritual path is even more significant than a vacation, isn't it? You really need a guide on the spiritual path. You really need someone who's been there before. It's incredibly vital if you want progress. Now, if you're just kind of taking Buddhism in a tourist way, just curious, you don't need a teacher, right? But when I'm talking about a teacher, I'm not talking about a facilitator or an instructor. I'm talking about a guru, right? And this is a very misunderstood concept, and also very abused, because we all know stories of like scary cults. We all have kind of worries about authority, right? We have authority issues. We have worries about cults. We have tons of pride, right? We have all sorts of baggage coming into the concept of needing a teacher. Do you reckon? Right? And it's not like we need to chuck all of that aside. We should have a healthy skepticism. We should have a healthy, open-minded cynicism, if that makes sense. We should approach anyone who calls themselves a guru with some caution, or who other people call a guru with some caution. And now guru or lama in our tradition, we usually use the word lama, but sometimes guru. So when we're looking at this topic in Discovering Buddhism, we're really learning about the criteria for checking. Who is someone suitable to be my guide? What are the characteristics? What's the tick list? What should I be looking for? And what is the difference between someone who's like a meditation instructor or a facilitator and a big T teacher? Because there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference in terms of your experience, in terms of the closeness, in terms of your practice. And so, you know, what are the differences between these different types of teacher, and what do you do with those relationships is a huge issue. So the spiritual teacher is one of those topics that if you do think you want to be a Buddhist, is a really, really vital thing to investigate. Because a lot of people don't realize that when you do something like get a transmission from someone, like a transmission of a text, you're making a karmic connection with them for the end of time. Yeah, when you take a tantric empowerment with someone like Chenrezig or Tara or one of these tantric deities that people are interested in, you're making a karmic connection with them from now until the end of time. And a promise to see them as the Buddha, right? So the recommendation is to check someone that you think might be qualified for maybe 12 years. What, do we ever do that? No, we barely wait 12 hours. Yeah, barely 12 hours. We go by name alone. Oh, they have the word Rinpoche after their name. They must be valid. Lots of people have the word Rinpoche after their name. You can buy the title Rinpoche. Be careful, okay? Yeah, be careful. And so what we want to do with the spiritual teacher is to have this sense of it might be important and useful to have one, but I'm not going to just jump into it. This is more important than a marriage. A marriage is for one life. A guru is forever. So you want to check them. So this is a really important topic because it shows you how to check, why to check, the dangers, and it helps your cynicism become like a really intellectually engaged, logical process where you can really suss people out. Yeah, it's really useful. Because the Buddha said, look, when I die, I'm going to keep teaching you through teachers with these qualities. So now you got your list, and you're like, you, oh, no, missing, not you. You? It's like you're interviewing, yeah? And it doesn't mean that you can't progress on the path without a guru. You absolutely can with kind of small t teachers and facilitators and meditation instructors. You can keep progressing, but it's going to be like light speed when you meet your own teacher. And it could be that your own teacher is someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who you don't talk to one-on-one, or maybe you have once, yeah, or maybe you get to see once a year when they come, to Europe. It doesn't mean that they're not present in your daily practice. If you have someone like His Holiness as your teacher, you're using his example, then listening for him in any of your sort of ordinary teachers. So you can still be connecting in a heart way, even if they're not in your daily life. Does that make sense? So, guru devotion it's even got kind of a creepy connotation, like it sounds kind of icky, like guru devotion, really? Yuck, right? And that's okay. But keep an open mind, like what benefit would it be to have a guide? And how could I start to approach this idea with some objectivity and some curiosity? And maybe never do it, but just, starting to check. And if a teacher says, I am enlightened, run the other way. Yeah. If a teacher says, I have realizations, run the other way. Okay? A real teacher will never say that. Because you cannot check. It's not a fair thing to say. Even if it's true, even if they do have realizations, even if they are enlightened, they can't say that because you can't check for that. It's not fair. Yeah? What you do is you observe their behavior for solid ethics. That's the first thing you're looking for, solid ethics. Yeah? And, so ask around, but really watch them. Because if you get that kind of feeling in your gut of, there might be something to it. Yeah? Yeah.
What would you say is solid ethics? What would it be?
Abiding by the 10 virtues. Yep. Not doing the 10 non-virtues. In particular, notice how they are with people of the opposite sex. Notice how they are with money. The classics, right? Right? Or, or the same sex or whatever, generally speaking. How are they? Are they flirting? That's creepy. Run. Right? Are they flirting with anyone? That's creepy. Run. A teacher shouldn't cross that boundary, right? It's a position of great authority and power. They should not be like on the prowl. Gross, right? They could be married. They could be a lay person, right? They don't have to be a monk or a nun, but they need to have solid ethics. So if you notice like flirty behavior, eek, yeah, super creep out.
I think that's quite obvious, but maybe
it is.
Other things.
I mean, you want to notice like consistency in behavior. Consistency of behavior so that they don't seem to be giving tons and tons of attention to the great benefactor, but no attention to the teenage kid who's kind of scraggly. Or, you want to see that they're just as likely to be open and caring to this, to a scraggly teenager rocking up for the first time as they are to the shiny benefactor wearing the Armani suit. You want to see consistency. Yeah, I mean, it's your common sense, right? But and the list of 10 qualities in the Lam Rim Chenmo is there, and this topic will, go into all of that. But definitely keep your common sense antennas up. Yes.
No, I was where someone else called the teacher a full realized teacher.
Who? What?
I was at where other people called the teacher realized. And is that something?
That is tricky, right? If the students say he's a Buddha, he's realized, that is quite common, and they might still be a good teacher. It's part of their practice to see them in that way. Because to see your teacher as a Buddha or as a representation of the Buddha means you connect with their wisdom in a deeper way. Yeah. And some of our teachers can have a real groupie thing around them, which is super off-putting. But try and see behind the hype. Remember that there's, people get that way around rock stars too. People are attracted to charisma. So kind of okay, they're being weird. Let me suss out the guru. I know that for myself personally, I put off meeting Lama Zopa Rinpoche, one of our teachers, for way longer than I wish I had because of the groupies around him. They were so glassy-eyed. And so, Rinpoche, and I was like, oh God, run. Yeah. Because my own teacher is very pragmatic and very sort of logic-based and linear. And, he'll say, your thinking is stupid. Stop doing that. And he's very straightforward. And that suits my personality. And so I heard about this Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and people would just get gaga about him. And I'd be like, oh God, who's this? And I put off meeting him. And when I finally had no choice but to meet him, otherwise I would sort of annoy my community, I was so grumpy. Oh my God, I was grumpy. We were going to meet him at the airport, and all of us had to. It was the rule. I'll meet him at the airport. So I'm waiting. I'm like, all right. And, I was really over it. And, I was young, but anyway. So I'm waiting, trying to be polite, but really just be polite. That was my mantra. Just be polite. Just be polite. It's fine. It's fine. And, and he's going person by person, putting the kata over their heads. And I was just like, don't look at him. It's fine, whatever. And I was just looking down. And he got to me, and he bent down, and he put his head like this, and he went, hello, like that. And I cracked up. It was so funny. And because all of this formality, and then this tiny little man goes, hello, like that. And it just kind of cracked my heart right open. And then I thought, all right, just listen to what he has to say. And then, of course, I was in and totally gaga and glassy-eyed, and it was like, stop, don't become one of the pod people. But the thing is that I was put off by the scene around him, and I wish I hadn't been. I wish I'd just met him much earlier, because he is an amazing teacher and really hits a different part of my mind than some of my other teachers, and inspires things in a different way. And so know that will exist because of human nature. There sometimes is kind of a difficult crowd around some of these big teachers for lots of reasons, because of lots of human emotions and tangles, but it doesn't mean the teacher isn't valid. They might be an amazing teacher with some unfortunate disciples, right? So it's be objective. Yeah, be objective. But also don't kind of go the other way and feel peer pressure. Like if everyone is going to an empowerment, for example, and you feel like you'd be rude not to go and you should do it, also have that steadiness that says, I'm not ready, I don't know them well enough, I need to check them more, So guru devotion is such a private and personal kind of practice. And quite sacred, and so it's really worth educating yourself about it, because it's not as simple as it sounds, and it's also not as culty and weird as you might worry it is. It's actually something very cool to explore, and then you can take it or leave it from an educated place rather than an emotional place or a stereotyped place. Does it make sense? So it's a really important one to kind of suss out. Yeah. What are we doing for time? Okay. The rest in 5 minutes. Ready? So you can tell that, even just an introduction, these are quite intriguing, yes? Death and rebirth, basically, death is certain. The time of death is uncertain, and at the time of death, the only thing that's useful is how much you've trained your mind. Thoughts? Right? Can someone at the last minute give you a spiritual path, a worldview, peace? They can give you morphine, right? But that's not the same thing. How are you in a crisis? Is there a place within you that is steady you can go to? Is it consistent? This is what it might be at death, right? We're probably going to be a little bit unwell and a little weak at death. Will we be able to engage the strong, kind side of ourself that is thinking, how can I make my death of benefit to others? Or are you going to be the sort of patient that becomes entitled and demanding and, full of grief and, self-centeredness? Can go either way unless we train our mind. So this topic is about understanding the importance of remembering death so that you have a meaningful life and a peaceful death, and also what happens at the time of death so that you're not surprised, and the huge opportunity there is at the time of death to transform your mind because it will be at its most subtle state. But also how to help other people, because we might be the sort of person that has to look after our parents when they're passing, or a partner or someone like that. So it also helps with some skills for accompanying someone in their death so that you can help them have as peaceful a process as you can. So it's a beautiful topic to explore. Then we got karma, which is about karma. Then we have refuge in the three jewels. So this is kind of why Buddhists become Buddhist, but you don't have to become Buddhist just because you go to that topic. But it's kind of the why of the difference between someone who practices Buddhism and a Buddhist. What is the difference between those two? And why would one decide to be just someone who practices but isn't Buddhist, and someone who actually identifies as Buddhist, and why? So it kind of helps unpack that conversation. Establishing a daily practice is about establishing a daily practice. Samsara and Nirvana is looking at the Four Noble Truths. It's looking at the 12 links. So if you've ever seen that picture in Tibetan Gompas or Tibetan meditation halls of a big scary monster eating a wheel, have some of you seen that picture? That's the teaching on the 12 links of dependent arising. And the big scary monster just represents karma and disturbing emotions, right? We don't have a devil idea, right? Who is the devil? Your own negative states of mind, okay? But it's an interesting teaching on how we get into these patterns and how do we get out. Then we have bodhicitta and transforming problems, which is, as I described before, really how to develop that awakening mind. Then the wisdom of emptiness is coming back to this that you touched on in presenting the path, but actually zeroing in on it in a meditative way, hopefully even in an experiential way, at least a taste. And then introduction to Tantra doesn't mean you have to practice Tantra. It's just unpacking what is this, because it's really misunderstood topic. And it's also a very efficient type of meditation. We don't have time, we're multitasking constantly, and Tantra is like multitasking meditation. It's a very cool type of practice. And you need a lot of stability before you try it. But basically, you could take a concept like compassion, and in Tantra, you're visualizing something to do with compassion, you're analytically remembering things about compassion, you have prayer beads in your hand, so you have a tactile thing, and then you're verbalizing the mantra of compassion. So all of your senses are engaged in the one concept, which means it integrates much more powerfully. Yeah, it's really fascinating. And because we are Westerners who multitask all the time anyway, some people find it easier to do Tantra than just a breathing meditation, even though it's more complex, because their minds are so used to holding many things at once. If you tell it, okay, you do this, hold, it actually sometimes likes it better. So, Tantra. So that's Discovering Buddhism, kind of in a short version. See how you go. Yeah, take it or leave it, experiment with it. And again, remember there's these 3 levels you can hit it at. You can be a total tourist, you can be just someone who's curious and wants to develop, or you can be someone really wanting to develop your spiritual path in an integrated way so that you can share it with others. And all the ways are totally fine. And you can pick and choose topics or do them all. And it's a really skillful curriculum because it was geared towards Western learning styles. Yeah. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Do we run this program through Mahamudra or in New Zealand?
We have attempted, but there is not enough local interest. Yeah, because of the beach, right? See, it's like practice Buddhism, go to the sea. Practice Buddhism, go to the right. But at Dorji Chan in the city, they do, don't they? Yeah. Yeah, in Auckland. Yeah, they do in Auckland. Yep.
So you can't do it online through?
You can do it online, yeah. It's easier and, I think more supportive to do it in a group physically, but if you just can't, there is the home study program and even like internet chat rooms and stuff, so you can still have some human interaction.
I talked to you at some point about
Yeah, and it really, if you go to that link, it's got it all laid out really straightforward. Yeah, so you can totally do it from home if you need. Yeah.
Yeah, it was how this was related to Lama Tsong Khapa's plan, or like
the Lamrim, yeah. Yeah, it is. The difference is that the straight traditional presentation from Lama Tsong Khapa starts with the spiritual teacher. For Westerners, we don't want to start with the spiritual teacher. We need to be convinced first, right? So it doesn't put that one first. It does other ones first. So some of the arrangement is slightly different, but it's the same topics.
And is it specific for the, maybe this is a boring question, but for the Geluk tradition, or is it for Tibetan Buddhism? Or like
well, there are things in common with all forms of Buddhism. Yeah. There are things in common with all forms of Tibetan Buddhism, and then there's a few things that are very Gelugpa. Yeah.
But this way of teaching, or this way of entering the...
It's definitely a Gelugpa style, meaning that this brand of Tibetan Buddhism is very much about debate, is very much about learning the philosophy behind something before you try it. But there is the meditation and experiential aspects as well. Some of the other traditions start with meditation and may or may not explain things later. Or start with meditation and then kind of sort out any difficulties you might have experienced. It really depends on your learning style and all of the ways the Buddha taught. It's not like there's arguments amongst the different kinds of Buddhas or Buddhists that this was the Buddha, this wasn't the Buddha. The Buddha actually taught all these different techniques, knowing that there's different learning styles and there's different ways to process information, and so you just kind of find what works for you. If you have a core tradition, it's very helpful, because then if you meet other types of Buddhism, you have a framework and a reference. So it's not like one is better than the other, they all work. But if you always kind of go around, then it's easy to get tangled, because sometimes we use language differently and terminology differently, and some of the processes are slightly different. So, it's all good stuff. Go to lots of different centers, check everything out, but it's good to have a core that can be your linchpin. Yeah, and then when you come across other stuff, you don't get as confused. Yeah.
I have a question on emptiness.
Yeah, sure.
I can ask it?
Yeah, sure.
So you said that realizing emptiness cuts the core so that one would not be reborn.
Well, it begins the process that cuts. Yeah, it begins the process. Yeah.
So basically my question is how? If I like in a theoretical place, I would understand that you're saying it's the inherent existence that I need to realize that doesn't...
The lack of inherent existence, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
And if I would have realized that, how does that help me not getting...
It's a very good question. See the course for details. But no, in a short answer though, because it is an important question, is first, why are you in samsara in the first place? Innate ignorance, thinking things do inherently exist. Right? And because we think things inherently exist, we develop attachment and aversion. Right? And so if you didn't have innate grasping at inherent existence, you wouldn't have attachment and aversion. Right? Because we have innate grasping at inherent existence, we think that we are 100% independent, self-sufficient, substantially existent, self-created, and so is everyone else, just as they seem. And that creates an immediate me and you, us and them. the reality is that physically it's easy to see the distinctions between us, but the thoughts in our head right now, they feel like our thoughts independently, unrelated to causes and conditions. Forgetting that if there was a different group of people here, and a different speaker, and a different temperature, and a different room, we would be having different thoughts right now. Who made your thoughts? Right? It feels like you made them all by yourself. But your own thoughts even are hugely influenced by your surroundings, what they remind you of, your history. Yeah? Who you think are the interesting people or the cool people in this room, and the ones you want to hang out with, and the ones you're kind of like, oh, I don't know about you, seems inherently existent. We have mild attachment and aversion already, even to strangers, right? We see them when we're like, kind of like you, kind of don't like you. Before they've even spoken, we might not have even had an interaction, and it seems so true. Yeah? And just a few layers of unpacking it, we realize there's so much more to the story. No one is good or bad in and of themselves inherently from their own side. So the very pattern that we're stuck in is the pattern created by this innate grasping. So if you turn it on its head and realize the opposite, it breaks the wheel. Yeah. It's like then you can't unlearn that kind of wisdom once you've seen through the veil. Theoretically, so they tell me, right? But, just think of something. This is my silly example that I always use. But, think, for example, if you've seen Star Wars, right? And Darth Vader's very bad. He's really bad. And then you see the prequels and you realize he's really suffered, right? He had a rough go. Poor Darth Vader, right? Then when you see the original, you're like, oh, look at him being evil. But, he really struggled. People don't understand him, right? A backstory kills all villains, right? Or if you've seen like a documentary about a scary serial killer, what they did was horrible, but once you see the documentary, you kind of get how they got that way, right? And so a kind of sympathy can even arise at the same time as that was a horrible thing they did, right? But before you knew the backstory, they were just evil. Just evil, right? Do you understand? Yeah.
I have a related question, but I don't know.
Yeah, short one.
Yeah, okay. So, could you explain the relation between wisdom, emptiness, and compassion?
Yep.
And if the view is that emptiness is compassion?
Emptiness helps compassion. Realizing emptiness helps you connect with compassion. Are they the same? One is like a relative truth, one is an ultimate truth, and they certainly help each other out. But think of, I guess, a very simple way is to realize that once you've understood someone's past, it's very easy to forgive them, right? Once you've understood how someone got a certain way, compassion comes more naturally. And so to realize that everyone lacks inherent existence or everyone is empty of inherent existence, I think it very much helps reinforce the idea that everyone wants happiness, no one wants suffering, everyone is worthy of happiness and freedom from suffering, but the ways that we ruin it for ourselves come down to the same problem in our thinking. Yeah? So when you see that your bad behavior comes from grasping at inherent existence, you see that other people's bad behavior comes from grasping at inherent existence. So if you were to realize the lack of inherent existence or the emptiness of inherent existence, there would be this heart-opening factor of, oh, like everyone else. But, can you realize emptiness without having compassion? Maybe. But I think it would be very hard if you realized emptiness to not have compassion. Because also the whole concept of who is me and where is you and identity becomes a little bit different. Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about how we think of our body as one thing, even though it's got all these parts. If you hit your toe on the wall and it really hurts, your hand goes to comfort it, doesn't it? But your hand is not the toe. Right? But it does. It naturally goes to comfort it. But it's not like later, then the hand says to the toe, you never do anything for me. Right? Why should I help you? You never do anything for me. that would be ridiculous, right? Because you understand it's part of a system. The same is true of all of us, right? If we see someone suffering, we want them freedom from that suffering, not just because that's nice and what nice people do, but because we're all so infinitely interconnected that what helps them helps me. It helps the system, it helps the network. So it's not that we're all like one, but it's that we're all connected like a network. Yeah, so the more you realize that, the more compassion comes more naturally and more kind of based in reality, not just wanting to be a nice person. So that's a short answer. Yeah, that's a short answer. So shall we call it a night? Yeah?
Okay, maybe one more question.
Oh, one more? Somebody? Oh, yes.
Can you give some advice how to differentiate between ego and self-love?
Ego and self-love. Ah, what is the difference? Indeed. Perfect self-love is renunciation. Yeah? Because, self-love is wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. What are the things that cause you suffering? Karma and disturbing emotions. So the nicest thing you can do for yourself is to get out of samsara. That's the kindest thing. That's the best act of self-love. But who are you getting out of samsara is a whole other question. Is it this, self-cherished, self-grasping I that we think inherently exists? Yeah, it's tricky. So we don't want to leave it there. We don't want to leave it at just, I want to get out of samsara so that I don't suffer. I want to get out of samsara and become a Buddha so that I can benefit all sentient beings. Because, we are completely interconnected and all of my happiness has come from others, right? In my interactions and the karma ripening from that, etc., etc. So the ego and self-love is tricky because when we say self-love in the world, we often mean getting comfort and nurturing and validation and support, or getting holidays, or getting recognition, or, things that are actually reinforcing the causes of suffering, but have temporary symptoms relief. The things we often call self-love make us feel better for a minute. Right? I'm going to self-love myself into this beer, right? I'm going to self-love myself into this one-night stand. And they do help for a minute, which is why we keep doing it. But actually, the kindest thing you can do is to overcome negative states of mind. Yeah. Does it sort of make sense?
Yeah. It's like sometimes if I, in some situations, if I should care about my feelings or others' feelings, because if I only think about others' feelings, I feel like I skip on myself. Yeah,
I understand what you mean. And so, whose feelings are more important, your feelings or other people's feelings? I guess what we're trying to do is to realize that if you're coming from self-interest, it's going to just stop with you. If you're coming from a holistic view, you can do both at the same time. So, I need to, if you go into a martyred space of, no, nothing for me, no, I'm fine, everything for you, then we become like some, traditional Catholic grandmother, right? Or something who's like, no, always thinking of others and burning out and quietly dying inside, right? We don't want to be that. But the thing is the way that kind of stereotype is helping as an identity thing, like a good person does this, right? What overcoming self-cherishing and bodhicitta do is in thinking of others, you wind up being very happy. Yeah, so what we're wanting is very strong self-awareness that's not self-conscious. Do you know the difference? Right? So self-aware is watching what you're saying to yourself and checking, is it true or not? Self-consciousness is, how do I seem to others? How do I seem to others? How do I seem to others? Yeah. So if you're checking what you're saying to yourself, you're much more likely to do things that are beneficial for both you and others, for the collective. Yeah? Like this. So you're just checking your motivation. Have I gone from self-awareness to self-consciousness? Yeah? Check. Yeah.
Okay,
all right, thanks everybody.
Thank you very much, Venerable Yönten.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.